Hi everyone and welcome to this tutorial on metadata modeling with data modules in IBM Cognos Analytics. Before getting started, it's good to have some foundational knowledge which can be found in what is now a quite old overview video of Framework Manager, but it covers a lot of ground with respect to best practices in metadata modeling, as well as the core documentation which presents metadata modeling guidelines. So having a read through this and watching the aforementioned video will give you a lot of knowledge around the query engine in Cognos Analytics, how cardinality is used in relationships, and all the best practices that go with metadata modeling. Now, having said that, in this particular tutorial, we're going to end up modeling from A to Z the model that you see here. And this model is two folders with what we call star schema groupings. So a fact table with its surrounding dimensions. Here you can see sales with its related dimensions, time, order methods, products, and then time ship and time close. And over here, sales targets with its related dimensions, time and products. And of course, time here is the same as time here because these are shortcuts to the same underlying object. And those underlying objects are found down in this hidden dimensions folder where we've modeled up a base time dimension table, as well as a base products dimension table, and we also have our order methods table. So we'll get into all that and how we go about all of this. But I want to point out quickly how, unlike in Framework Manager, which I have open here, where part of the best practices was to have a multi-layered approach to your modeling, which is having a database layer where you import and leave that layer alone. Then you have a business view where you do a lot of your business logic, create relationships, filters, calculations, etc. And then finally, your third layer, I like to call that a 0.5 layer because it's simply shortcuts. And again, the aforementioned star schemas. So here you can see star schema groupings, in this case sales with all its related dimensions, and the same thing for sales targets and its related dimensions. Now that's quite a few layers, and there was a lot of reason, and you'll see that in the other video that I mentioned, as to why we use that approach. But now with data modules, that's been simplified, and a lot of that work is done for you in the background. So not only will this tutorial cover creating this particular data module, it will also highlight using a Gregorian calendar to do relative time queries. And we'll also show you how to use navigation paths to basically allow for drill up and drill down behavior within logical hierarchies that you have in your data, and sometimes not even logical hierarchy or logical hierarchies. But we're going to stick to logical hierarchies, as you can see in this case, where we have product line, which drills down to product type, and then product name, and in time, year, quarter, month, and date. So we're going to start off by building this entire module from scratch. And before we can do that, we actually have to have a data server connection and metadata loaded for that particular data server so that we can leverage that metadata in data modules. So if we go over to our connections, the one that we'll be using today is the Great Outdoors Warehouse. Warehouses are preferred because of their design for the efficiency of reporting. They're designed strictly for reporting purposes as opposed to transactional systems. And if we go to this particular connection that we've defined and we look at the assets, we'll see in this particular case that we have loaded 79 tables from the Go Sales schema. And so now this Go Sales schema can be leveraged in data modules to basically model the metadata for presentation purposes and for use to generate queries against that data source in dashboards and reporting. Okay, so let's go back to content and let's get started. Basically, we'll create a new data module by clicking on New and hit Data Module. And here's where we're going to go to those data servers that I just mentioned. And we'll scroll down to our Great Outdoors Warehouse and we'll select the Go Sales DW schema. At this point, you're asked if you would like to discover related tables or select tables. In this particular case, we want to pick our own tables. So we'll scroll down in the list to grab the items that we're interested in. So in this case, we know that we want to model a time dimension. I want to grab the quarter lookup because I'd like to have Q1, Q2 to be presented in my final presentation. And that I know is located in this particular table. Then we'll scroll down. We want to get our products dimension, the product line lookup, the product lookup, and there's other tables that we could involve too, but to keep things simple and moving in this particular video, we will just keep it simple. We'll select the sales fact. We'll also select the sales target fact, and we also had the order method dimension. Okay, so this is a good starting point. And you can see all the naming conventions have been camel cased or pretty printed. So there's all that work that we would used to do in Framework Manager is now automatically done for us in the metadata loading phase when you're loading the assets. So if it follows specific conventions where it's all uppercase with underscores in your data source, we will then remove the underscores and then camel case the table names and the column names. So one of the first things we're going to do is just create a folder to organize our objects. I'd like to create a folder called dimensions. And I know that we're not going to present this particular folder to the end users. So I'm going to hide that from the end users. And then I'm going to put all of our dimension tables by multi-selecting them into that folder. And then within that folder, I know that I have to build up some of these tables and consolidate them into one table view. So for example, time dimension and then the time quarter lookup into one table. So the ones that we're going to build up, I'm going to put those in a further subfolder, and we'll call this underlying objects. You can call this anything you'd like. So we'll put all those items in there. And we know that order method will pretty much remain what it's going to be. It's quite a simple table with just order key, order code. Now for the purposes of this tutorial, we're going to keep everything in the English language, so we're going to remove the other language columns just to make this a little easier to read and look at. And beyond that, we'll just quickly rename the table so that it's a little cleaner. And again, you could just call it order method. You don't have to call it order method base. I just do that to know that this is sort of my base foundational table that I'll use as a shortcut in the star schema groupings that we'll do later. So one of the first things you'll also want to do after you've imported your tables, which again come from this source base data module. So these are the loaded assets from that schema that we saw earlier. And they're automatically brought in here. The tables that we picked are automatically brought in here. But we'll want to go in and validate or verify the actual data types and usages for these columns. The same thing was done in Framework Manager as well. So while we do our best to get things right, we don't always get it right. So this is why it's crucial to come in and make sure that you correct these things. So current month, month number, we know those aren't measures, those are attributes, or they could be an identifier, but because this isn't indexed or it's not a primary foreign key, we don't mark it as an identifier. So in this case, we'll just basically take all these and make them attributes. Okay. And if you click on any of these down arrows, you can see the actual, we actually do a query right to the database and what we call members here, return these, and you can actually see the values in the data simply by expanding any of the column names. Okay, and you can see in this particular case, so the day key, date type, because our smarts looks at this data and the data types, we make some assumptions and assign. So we've related this now to be a time reference. So if we click on this property, we can see that it represents time, and in this particular case, day date represents a date, which is accurate. Okay, and here day key, we say it's time and it represents a day. So this is all stuff that you get for free. So what I'm going to do here again is I'm going to remove the language columns to clean this up, make this a little bit easier to read. In the interest of time, I've gone ahead and renamed a lot of the columns and fixed all the data type and usage issues that I found. So the next step is we'll build up a table view to consolidate items that come from the time dimension and the time quarter lookup. So what we can do is simply create a new table. We'll call this a table view, and then we will select the tables we want to go in that, which would be time dim and time quarter lookup, and we will deselect the other ones. And we will call this time base for now. So once we have this dimension, we'll throw that into the dimensions folder and just rearrange this so that we have our time base now in our order method base. And then we can take a look at this and arrange this as required. So we'll want to put year up at the top, followed by the quarter key, etc. I won't go through all that. I'll clean these things up in the background as we move through this video. Okay, so I've quickly cleaned up the time base dimension, organized it appropriately, year followed by quarter, by month, and then by day, and I've removed duplicate values that might have been brought in through the table view join between the underlying tables. So there were duplicates of month and month key, for example, and quarter key. So those were removed. And so there's a few things to take note of. You can see here in the properties that you can see the identifier of this new table that we created. And you can rename this if you wish. These other items are a little bit more advanced, so we'll cover those later. And then you can see the source information, so where everything comes from. So we know that this is time base table view that comes from the new data module, which we haven't saved yet. And also you can right click on the table and you can say, show me the query information. And here you can see how this would then query the database to get this table or the results for this table. And you can see most things come from the time dim, with the exception of the quarter lookup, quarter EN, which is the quarter, the attribute of Q1, Q2, etc. That's pulled from the quarter lookup table. So now I want to show you creating the product base dimension, and I want to draw your attention to the creation process, which I didn't do last time, but you have these toggles here, and so you can view all tables, or you can go back to viewing just the selected tables, which in this case are all these tables here. So as I deselect them, you'll see them disappear. But if you made a mistake, you can simply click this toggle and it'll come back and you can reselect that. So this might be an easier way to go through it to see what you're actually deselecting. So we don't need time-based, don't need order method. So these are the three tables that we want in. Okay, and you can click next. And here, rather than just accepting and clicking finish, you can actually expand these tables and then deselect or keep the columns that you want to bring in. So in this case, we'll keep all the ones from sales product dim. Because we have product line code in the product dim, we'll deselect it from this one so we don't have it twice. And the same thing for product lookup. We don't need product number in there twice. And we probably don't need the product language, but this is something that I'll bring up in a moment too, because we're going to use this column for a filter in the underlying table. Okay, so we got rid of all the extraneous columns that we don't want. Now we have time base, product base. We're going to bring that into the dimensions folder. And again, we'll just arrange this accordingly. Take a look at it. Things look pretty good, but we'll want to rearrange these. But if we take a quick look at the grid, you'll see there's an error here. And the error tells us that there's a missing join in the underlying tables. So we've missed something on the import. So the product base is made up of 3 underlying tables. So let's just arrange this a little bit better so that things are easier to read. So here's the sales product lookup table. There's the product dim, and there's the product line lookup. So that error message makes a lot of sense. We've missed that relationship. So we can go ahead and create that. So we'll take product number from the sales product lookup, and we'll go find the corresponding product number in the sales product dim. And we could do it one-to-many or one-to-one. It doesn't really matter in this because this really will be a one-to-one lookup in the end once we filter the table. Right now you can see that there's multiple languages in here for the product name and for the descriptions. And we want to filter that out to just be English. So we'll go ahead and just make this a one-to-one. We'll match these selected columns. If you click refresh here, you'll see the results come back, and we'll click OK. And now we'll want to go in order to have the product base table behave the way that we want it to, which is here. If we click on that and look at the grid, and we scroll over to the products, we start to see multiple languages for each of the product names, and we don't want that. So that means we have to go back to the underlying product lookup table, and we're going to want to create a filter for that. So we'll go down to Manage Filters, and we're going to select the column that we want to filter on, which in this case is the product language, and we'll select Add Filter. And here we can select a value that we want. So in this case, we just want EN, and we'll click OK. So now when we go back to the product base, and we go look at our products, we'll see we only have English. Okay, so we've sort of finished up with the underlying objects. We now have 3 dimension tables that we saw in the initial model that I presented to you. And now we want to relate those things to the fact tables. So what we can do is basically create some folders. We'll create a sales folder, and that will contain the sales facts. And we'll create a sales target folder. And we can drag and drop the fact tables into their respective folders. And we can rename these. We'll just call this sales fact. And this will be sales target fact. Okay. So now if we go back into relationships, this is another point that we're going to want to clean things up. We don't want the underlying object to have a relationship to the sales fact table. And we don't even want the order method base. We want to use shortcuts to have relationships to these items. So this may be counterintuitive, but we want to remove these relationships. And then we'll organize our dimensions down here. We'll organize our facts up here. Product base is going to have a shortcut created for it. Time base will as well, and so will order method base. And then we'll take those shortcuts and we will put them in the folders with their fact tables and relate them to the appropriate fact tables. So let's go ahead and create shortcuts. So we're going to do a shortcut for the product base table. Okay. And we'll drag that into the sales folder. We will rename this to just be product. We will create one for time. And one for order method. Okay, so we have all these shortcuts now. We'll just quickly rename them just so they're a little bit cleaner. And what we can do is we can copy all three of these, and then we can paste those into the sales target folder. And now we can start doing some relationships. So let's go start with order method and we'll relate that. Obviously we didn't need the order method one for sales target because it actually doesn't apply there. So we'll just remove that quickly. And I will create a join between these two tables. And that will be on order method key. Match selected columns. It is a one-to-many from order method to sales fact. I will do the same thing for this particular time dimension. So this is the shortcut that we want. This one will belong to sales target. This will be on the day key to the order day key. Again, one-to-many. And then we'll do the last one, which would be product. We'll bring that over here and do a relationship for that. And that will be on product key. Now for sales target, because we know our data, we know that this is on a different level of granularity. So we are going to create a relationship on the month key because the data for the sales target is at the month level. And we'll have one-to-many there. And then we'll select product. We'll bring that over here. Create that relationship. And this will be on product type key, again, at a higher level of granularity. Okay, so this is already starting to look like the model that I showed you at the top of the video. The only thing that's now missing is bringing in the relative time filters that I spoke of, but we're going to hold off on that for a little bit. And there's something called column dependencies that we're going to want to apply because we want to make sure that the sales target fact measures roll up appropriately to the time dimension and to the product dimension. But we're going to show you what the outcome is if you don't apply those things called column dependencies. So we'll do that next. So if we use the try this data module button here, which will open up reporting, we can do a quick query and say, okay, let's take year and month, and we will take quantity and add that there, and sale total maybe. And of course, we're going to go back into the model because we don't really like this organization. And usually we'll want to have the sales fact, the item that is the focus of this folder, to be at the top, and then alphabetize the dimensions. So we'll go and fix that up shortly. And we're going to grab sales target from here. Another thing we want to do is hide these keys. There's no reason to have them displayed in the target or the sales target fact table or the sales fact table. You can get those keys from the dimension tables themselves, and that gives a cleaner presentation as well. So if we preview this now, we'll just take a look at the results. Okay, so we see all these values coming back. And if we now decide to go and put a summary on these and total them, so when we get to the very bottom, we see that this is an extremely inflated number. It should be closer to the 4 billion range as opposed to this 127 billion range. So we're double counting the values for sales target for every single day that is found in the time dimension for that particular, for each of the months. And that's where column dependencies come in. So we'll close this and we'll go back and we'll start to apply column dependencies to the dimensions that require them. So product base and time base. And of course, the shortcuts will just pick up whatever it is that we're doing in these underlying objects. Okay, so right click on this first one called product base, and we'll say specify column dependencies. And we'll expand this and say, okay, we'll start off with product key. So this is a dependency. And we're going to get these validation error messages now saying there's a bunch of things that haven't been defined. You've started to basically define your column dependencies, and there's a whole bunch of things that haven't been assigned to a particular key. So we're going to do that now. Okay, so we're going to have product line code. It's going to be one of them. And then product type key is another. And then what you do is you take this little circle icon here and you basically build your hierarchy of, or the natural or logical hierarchy of this thing. So now product line code falls into product type key, falls into product key. And then we want to add the attributes, the related attributes to each of these levels where it makes sense. So product number, for example, will go in the lowest level, base product number, product color code, all these things are at the lower level. The introduction date, the product name, product description. So all these things fall into this level. We'll quickly rename that. And we're going to sort all this stuff out. I'll do that again behind the scenes. So product line, while we're here, we may as well drag that up into the product line code level. And then we have product type key. So let's go find those. So there's product type code, and there should be a product type somewhere. And it looks like we've missed that product type lookup table. So we actually have to go back and rebuild that. So we need to import that into the underlying objects because that's one of the ones that we missed. So we don't have a string value that we can use. So to bring that in, we can simply go back, bring that in to the into the metadata tree here, ensure that the join exists, and then bring that into your product base. But we'll finish off first with what we were doing, which was the column dependencies with what we do have. So it looks like we're just missing one thing here, which is product type code, and the warning messages should all go away. Okay, so the model validates itself in real time as you work, and now we have no more warning messages. So everything's been accounted for. But now, as you model, and it is an iterative process, you realize you may have missed something, so you can come back into the source and you can go and find the thing you're looking for. And here it is, product type lookup, and you can bring that in. So you're going to bring that into the model, and then we'll arrange it. Okay, so here it is. We'll just drag that into the underlying objects. Let's go to our relationship diagram. We see it's here. We see it did come in with relationship, which is good. Quickly check the items. Everything looks good. We'll get rid of the language columns. Okay, and then we can go to our product base and we can edit this table. Again, looking at all the things so you can see that we're missing a table altogether. So we're going to hit the previous button and we're going to hit the toggle again, go search through the data module and select the table to add it. Click next again, then you'll see that table show up in your underlying objects. Make sure it's selected. And again, we don't want product type code to come in a second time, so we'll deselect that and click finish. And now that's going to be back in our product base, and we're going to get a warning because we have a new item in here that is not associated to a column dependency. So going back to the column dependencies, we will add this new item here called product type EN, and the warning message should go away. Again, we'll rename that. And that's it. So column dependencies have been defined for product base, and we'll do the same thing shortly for time dimension. Again, I'll pause the video and I'll clean up this product table so that things are lined up and ordered the way I would want them presented to the end users when they author the reports and dashboards. Okay, so I've cleaned up product base a little bit. So it makes more sense now. It's a logical hierarchy here. Removed items that we're not really going to use in this particular tutorial. And now we're going to do the same thing and create column dependencies for time base. So we'll start off with year, bring in quarter key, month key, day key, and then logically create our hierarchy here. And then bring in the items that we need to. So we'll bring in quarter number and quarter, month number and month for the month key, day key, day date, and weekday. Oh, just need these last two for day key. There's another thing we want to look at very quickly here is these toggles here, and we'll have to clean those up in product as well. So you have repeating and you have dependent. So the question is, do these values repeat and are they dependent on their parent? So in this case, day key is a unique value. So it does not repeat and it is independent of its parent. Same thing with month key, because if you look at the data for month key, you'll see that it actually has the year and then the month number. So you can identify this without having to go to the parent. So going back here, we know that it does repeat, but it's not dependent. And the same thing here, quarter key is not dependent on the parent. Sorry, misclicked. So independent, independent, but it does repeat. And then same thing for here, year is independent, and it does repeat. And so if you look at the data, you'll see that this is true. So year does repeat, but it's independent of anything above it. In this case, there is nothing above it, but it would be. Same thing for the quarter key. You can tell which quarter this is. So this is the first quarter of 2010, and then this is the first month of 2010. Okay. So we'd have to do something similar with the column dependencies for product key. So we know that this is a unique key and it is independent. Product type key is also independent, but it does repeat because it's higher level. This is independent and it repeats. Okay, and there's another toggle here, min, max, group by. So if these values actually repeated for some reason, would you take the min value or the max value to clean up the data, or would you want to group by? Okay, so now this is where it gets interesting for the product type key. So if we use one of these attributes against a measure and we're aggregating that measure, we actually do want to group by these higher level keys. So these guys are okay to min. And we can do the same thing for the year. And if we go to the time base, again, same thing. We want to group by the month, quarter, and that's it. So our column dependencies are defined. And now if we go and test that same scenario again in reporting, where we take year and month and go grab our sales fact and grab sale total, for example, and then grab our sales target and do a total on this and then view it and go to the bottom, we now see that we're no longer double counting our sales target values, which is good. So the next thing we can do is, again, as I stated, clean up the target, or sales target fact and the sales fact. We don't really need to display all these keys, so we'll just simply hide them from the user. Okay, so this will be a cleaner display now when we look at it in the metadata tree in the final result. One of the things that we talked about earlier was bringing in a calendar and then using that to do relative time filters, as well as creating relative time measures. So let's do that. We'll click here to add a new source. We will navigate to the content. I know I have a calendars folder. And in this particular case, I'm going to select the Gregorian calendar, and we're going to bring that in. It shows up. It's already hidden. We're just going to bring that down into our dimensions folder. And what we're going to do is we are going to go down to the time dimension. We're going to select the day date, and we're going to go look at the lookup reference property and relate that to the Gregorian calendar that we just brought in. So now this calendar is tied to this time dimension. When we expand the day date, you will see now that we have all these filters: prior week, prior month, and this is all done automatically for you. So there's several relative time values or filters that you can use that you can add to your report. And beyond that, what you can do is you can go to your sales fact table and you can select your measures and also give them a lookup reference. And in this case, we're going to make them point to the day date in the time dimension of time base. And again, now this is one of the reasons why I named it time base as opposed to keeping everything named time. So now I know that I'm selecting the correct day date. And now all of a sudden you see you can expand these values, and each one of these now has relative time measures. So you can simply drag these things onto the report and compare current year to the previous year, year to date, etc. And all of this is done automatically for you. Now, if we want to do the same thing for sales target fact, because this is at a higher level, at the month key, this relative time feature works with dates and not month keys. So you would have to either bring in a date that represents a date for each month, so the first of each month, for example, and that value would just repeat for every day of the month, and you could use that. We're not going to get into that in this particular tutorial. I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that you would have to have a key or a month key that is actually a month date that you would associate to the Gregorian calendar and then to the sales target. Or you could bring a date, again, the first of every month that repeats for each of your values, into the sales target fact table, and then you could relate that to the Gregorian calendar, and then you would get your filters for your sales targets, because you would say the sales target would then relate to your month date value that's in your sales target fact. Okay, but in the interest of time, we're not going to do that. It's just something that you can do. So the next thing we want to do is to allow for drill up and drill down in the reports. So to do that, we're going to create navigation paths. And there's a few options now. You can create navigation paths on each one of these shortcut dimensions. And again, let's rearrange this while we're here. Okay, so you can do the navigation paths on each of the shortcuts, but that'll create a navigation path for each of these star schema folders. So it's a choice that you have to make, a decision that you'll want to make. My preference in the current iteration of the product is to create the navigation path on the base dimensions. And so when you do that, you won't be able to use the shortcuts then if you want to do drill up and drill down. But what's interesting is when you do drag in the items from the navigation path, the relationships will still be honored to the appropriate fact table. And I'll show you that once we get into testing this out. So the first thing we'll do is we'll build the product dimension. So we know we want product line. That's a starting. We want to go down to product type and then product name. So that's one nav path. And then we'll do one for time. And this will be year, quarter, month, and day. And we don't really need to do one for order method because it has only one level. Okay, and you can rename these as you'd like. So in this particular case, we'll just call this product. And this one we will just call time. Okay, so let's save this data module so we don't lose our changes. And we will save that to data module tutorial. Okay, so let's test all this out. So we've saved our tutorial or our DM tutorial. So we'll go up one level. There's our DM tutorial. Let's create a dashboard this time instead of a report. And what we'll do is we'll just create a simple list just for or table for demonstration purposes here. And we're going to go to our navigation path this time instead of going to the shortcuts because we want to do some drilling up and drilling down. So we will go and say, okay, I want product line and I want year. So those are good starting points. And we'll add in sales fact. Okay. And then if we want order method in there as well, we'd have to go down to the order method dimension. We won't take it from the navigation path because one doesn't exist for it. Okay, and so here we get our auto grouping, we get our summaries by default. And let's say I want to now drill down into camping equipment. I can do so. And then I get my cooking gear. If we scroll down, I get lanterns, etc. If we want to drill down further from that, we can drill down again. Okay, so now these are all the items under lanterns. So now we're down at the product name level. And if we want to go back, we use the back button. And now we're back up to the top level so we can again navigate through our camping equipment. Okay, so we've covered off the basics. We've brought in multiple fact tables, multiple dimensions. We modeled the dimensions. We related the dimensions to the fact tables through the use of shortcuts. We organized our model. We cleaned everything up. And now we have something that is presentable and usable and intuitive. The only lesson that needs to be taught to the end users when they're using the data module is that if they want to drill up and drill down in this particular scenario, if they want to drill up and drill down, they would go to and take their items from the navigation path as opposed to the product found in the star schema folders. And the other thing that they would need to know, if they want to do a multi-fact query, they can take their facts from each of the star schema folders, but they would have to include at least one item from one common dimension. So in this case, from either product or from time. And then you can do a multi-fact query. So we can bring in sales target fact, but because order method is not related, we'll just remove that column and we will add sales target fact to the table, and we will see that indeed everything comes in as expected, no double counting occurs, and that's the one rule that users need to know is have attributes from common dimensions in order to do your multi-fact queries. And you can tell which are common because they have the same name in each of the folders. Okay, so now we're going to show some relative time filters and relative time measures. And for those who are astute, they'll notice that the time has changed and the date has changed because I actually forgot to show this the first time around recording. In this particular case, when we're going to use these filters, they typically will use the current date and then apply the filter against the data in the database based on the current date. But because our data is outdated, we can use a global parameter called as of date. And so when that's set, the query engine will end up using that value instead of using the current date. So if we look at the parameters tab here, you can see I have an as of date global parameter. And then if I go to the home page, you can see here I can set my parameters. And in this case, I've set a parameter or the as of date parameter to 2013-07-31. So when we go back to the dashboard, we can scroll down to our day date in the time dimension and drag in year to date as a filter, and this will just apply a filter to the visualization, and you can see indeed it is now filtered to 2013 till July. So it thinks that July is the current period. Now we can remove all this and do comparative analysis strictly using the measures. And so what I'll do is scroll up to the measures and we'll do the same type of thing, but we'll just drag year to date for sale total on there. So this is 1.1 billion. And then we'll go and grab the prior year to date for comparison. And that's 858 million. And so to see or to confirm that this data is actually correct, we can drag year back in. And what you'll see is that you'll get no value for 2012 for the YTD sale total because it only applies to 2013, and vice versa. For the prior year, it only applies to 2012. And if we throw the months in there, then you'll see, again, indeed it is only showing year to date till July. So clearly going back to just the two measures, this is how you would typically use this, and then you could put a custom label on here or just use the label, which is also self-explanatory, saying year to date and prior year to date. And so the last modeling thing that we haven't done yet is to do role-playing dimensions. And when we looked at the model initially that we were going to model throughout this tutorial, we saw a time close date and a time ship date. So we're going to implement that now. So if we go back into our data module, what we're going to do is simply create copies of this time base and then paste that in. Okay, so now we have essentially a copy of the time base, but we're going to use that, we're going to rename it, and then we're going to relate it to the sales fact table. So we can drag and drop that right up into our sales folder because it only will apply to the sales folder. Quickly rename this to time close. And the reason I use this instead of using, for example, an alias of the table, which is a shortcut, we can rename items in a table view, whereas we can't rename them in a shortcut. As you can see, these are read-only columns. We can add calculations and filters and so forth to the shortcuts, but we can't rename them. So when you're dragging year from time close, you probably want to see year and then close in parentheses. So I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to rename all this. I'm going to add in the other time ship dimension, and then we'll come back and create our relationships. Okay, so now we have our two role-playing time dimensions, and what we're going to do is create a relationship from them to the sales fact table. And so the difference between this and the regular time dimension is we're going to go from the day key, from day close, but in this case we're going to go find the close day key in the fact table and relate to that key. So now this copy of the table is just behaving in a different context with respect to the sales fact table. Other than that, everything else is the same. So we'll create a relationship between time ship and sales fact. We'll go down to the day key ship and then scroll down to the ship day key in the sales fact table. And that's it. We've now implemented 2 role-playing dimensions. So let's take a look and see what that looks like in a dashboard. So if we go back to our content, go create a dashboard off this newly saved data module. And now if we simply do, for example, year and month, and we add a measure in from our sales fact. So this is all based on when it was ordered. But if we go now to the ship and close time dimensions, we can see that there might be actual differences in the year and the month. So here you can see the month was January for the order. But if we look at the year and the ship, well, parts of this order shipped in February, other parts in January, and other parts in March. And so that's how this works out well. And when you look at the labels, you can see, okay, this is what our order date was, but now we know that this year and this month is from the ship time dimension. And the same would apply to the close dimension. So the last thing that I want to show you is how to minimize the SQL for these table views. So we know these table views are based off of multiple underlying tables that are joined to each other. So let's take a look at how it behaves currently. So if we just launch reporting again and we do a simple test case of bringing in product line into the table and then viewing the generated SQL for that, we'll notice that there's quite a bit of SQL that's brought back here. So we're going after all these columns and we're going after all these joins in order to bring something back as simple as just bring me back the product lines. Okay, so this is behaving as a view, so to speak, currently. So we're going to go back into the data module. We're going to go to the advanced properties and we're going to go to the item list property and we're going to change that to used. And what this, so all is what we just saw. And if we click used, what that will do is it will only retrieve the columns and the tables that are required to satisfy the query that you're doing. So if we now try that again, the exact same query that we just did, and we look at the generated SQL, we see it's much more simplified. We're going after one column from one table and we're grouping by. And that's it. So hopefully this tutorial's been helpful. There's much more to show. There's multilingual metadata, multilingual data itself. There's all kinds of features that you can use. There's the ability to do something similar to parameter maps that's found in Framework Manager by bringing in spreadsheets, for example, and using a query value function to look up and replace values. So the gaps are closing very quickly between the two products. Obviously, the benefit of this one is it's all online. There's no separate install. You just model online and you can work with other modelers. There's also the ability to have multiple data modules, so you could put all your dimensions in their own data modules, having multiple modelers work on those things, and then have fact data modules where you combine those with their related dimensions and do the relationships there, and then build a final model that has multiple star schemas in it. In this particular tutorial, we put all the star schemas in one data module. There's no right or wrong way to do that. If you're just one or two modelers, it might be better to just work in one sort of environment, because the more data modules you have, the more complexity there is, and the more difficult it is to troubleshoot things. So there's pros and cons to everything, and so there's things that you have to take into consideration. So again, I hope this was useful, and hopefully we'll be able to put out some more videos with some more advanced features for you soon.